second, I want to start the recording. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. I want to welcome all of you to our part 2 of a series titled Colorism and Anti-Black Racism, reflecting on the mistakes in our Muslim community. Today we have an honorable guest speaker. We thank him for joining us, and I'll be introducing him shortly, but we wanted to begin with dua, as we should for every event. So on behalf of the South Florida Muslim Federation, I do welcome you all and thank you for joining us. And I hope that you continue to join us throughout this series, as this is a critical topic in our community today. So without further ado, if Brother Samir Kakli can start us off with dua, inshallah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulihi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, kama sallaita ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim, innaka hamidun majid. All praise to the one Almighty God, Allah, who has no partner, Lord of all the worlds. May He send His peace and salutations upon His last messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him, and all the messengers throughout history. May Allah put barakah in this gathering. I ask Allah to put His blessing in this gathering and enlighten us and educate us on the problems in our country today, as well as in the past. I ask Him to let us learn the lessons of history, and let this inspire us to come up with a dialogue and discuss solutions to improve our situation as a society, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, accept from us and overlook our good deeds. In your hands is all good. Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen.
Ameen, Ya Rabb.
Sister Maha, I think you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm notorious for doing that. Thank you for the heads up. So I don't know how many of you joined us for part 1 of this series, but in summary, we did define colorism, we defined racism, we defined prejudice, and Sister Patricia gracefully went through the 5 levels of acting out prejudice. We discussed how we're taught Islamic history and American history from a European perspective, and how we need to go back and look at those curriculums and teach them properly and insert the importance of the African impact on Islamic history. For example, the role of the Abyssinians in protecting the Prophet, reclaiming the legacy of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who had a very deep relationship with the Africans, many of whom surrounded him and had a huge influence on his life and his upbringing. And we talked a little bit about the except for Bilal syndrome, which is basically, you know, we have this idea that Bilal was the only African that was around the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that is just simply false. So today, our part 2 of this series is the history of racism and its institutionalization in American society. We have with us Mr. Pascal Robert, who is a distinguished speaker. I've heard him speak on this topic, and it was just absolutely wonderful. He knows how to, you know, condense it into a short time frame and give you so much knowledge. So we appreciate you taking the time to be here with us. He has a Bachelor of Arts from Hofstra University and a Juris Doctor from Boston University School of Law. He was born and raised in New York and is the co-founder of the Haitian Bloggers Caucus. He's been known for years to the online world as Thought Merchant. Since 2007, he's been recognized for his hard-hitting, blunt, unvarnished style of bringing attention to current events and global affairs, especially those affecting communities of color. So again, we thank you for joining us. Welcome, Mr. Pascal Robert.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, brothers and sisters. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and bless you for your efforts to address this very, very critical subject, alhamdulillah, that has plagued humanity, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, since even before the beginning of the United States as a nation. Because one of the things we as Muslims should embrace that is very rarely discussed that should give us a point of pride to be of the Ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that from what I believe I have known and my knowledge, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the first and only Abrahamic prophet who had a mandate to fight anti-black racism. If you read the histories of all of the Nabi in the Quran, you read the history of all of the Nabi in the Kitab of the Nasara, the Christians, and the Jews, you never hear specific reference to discussing the role of racism in their story. Or with the story of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when you read the Hadith of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and you read his interaction with the Abyssinians who were slaves in Jazat al-Arab at the time in Arabia, you can tell that not only was this a secondary issue, it was enough of an issue that for the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his final and last statement to his ummah, he made the treatment of the black African people in the ummah a primary agenda that he disclosed to his followers. So one of the things, sadly, that we as Muslims do not embrace in our history and in our mandate, I believe that being a Muslim is of course our primary goal is to submit to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but our mandate is to follow the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his sahaba. And the mandate of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to not only fight injustice, but he particularly was fighting racism against black African people. So alhamdulillah, I appreciate you in the spirit of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam having this event today, realizing that we are trying to reassert one of the important mandates of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and not only in his ummah, but in the community overall. Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. It is obvious that in today's time, with the rise of Donald Trump and reactionary nationalism, white nationalism all over the world, and when I say all over the world, I think that we need to realize that Donald Trump, and I'm not trying to make a advocacy for us to support anyone. This is not a campaign for any candidate. Donald Trump is one star in a constellation of a global phenomenon of the rise of reactionary nationalism in the world. You see this phenomenon with France with the rise of Marie Le Pen and her party, Front National. You see this in Great Britain with the rise of Boris Johnson. You see this in Hungary with Viktor Orban. You see this in Brazil with Bolsonaro. In this current stage of the global reign of Western civilization, we have moved to where Western nations are embracing reactionary nationalism, or you can say reactionary white nationalism. The question must be asked, as the dean of justice that Islam is, what is the position of the Muslim Ummah and the Muslim community in a world with the mandate that we have to fight racism and injustice, when we are not even discussing the reality that globally there is a phenomenon going on that we are not really putting the points together to connect why this is happening. And one of the things that we rarely do as Muslims, because this kind of conversation is controversial because of the political ideology certain Muslims have based on it. We do know that Allah Azza wa Jal controls all things and everything is under the qadr of Allah. But we also know that in humanity there are certain factors that affect human change and behavior. And when it comes to the role of slavery in the West, we have to understand that slavery and racism is a paradigm of human exploitation that is rooted in exploiting labor for the benefit of capital extraction. What I'm trying to say as Muslims is that we cannot divorce the agenda of human subjugation from the economic motivations that those that control the power structures that we live in to determine how and why exactly they are treating humanity the way they are. And particularly with the history of anti-Black racism, this is important because we have to understand that, the European does not genetically believe that the Black man is inferior. We are not. Allah tells us that, He made us of different nations to know each other. So Allah Azza wa Jal did not put in any race or people a genetic belief that this is inferior, this is superior. This is a product of a socialization of various communities, and usually the socialization and the belief in the inferiority of one race over the other has a political or economic motivation. With the advent of the transatlantic slave trade, which comes about with the fall of the Islamic Empire in Andalusia in Spain, the Spaniards and the Portuguese, who had Africans among them, particularly many of them Muslims, in their urge to expel the Muslims from their land, began to enslave them. Many of those first slaves that were actually exported to North America, the first slave ship embarked and hit Hispaniola in 1501, many of those first Africans were what they were called Moriscos. They were actually African Muslims who were forced to convert to Christianity. So one of the main blind sides that we have as Muslims is that there is a very, very intricate connection between Islamic history and the origins of the transatlantic slave trade, because we have to realize that the origins of the transatlantic slave trade are directly connected to the fall of the Muslim empire in Spain and Andalusia, and the decision of the European, the Spaniards, and particularly the Portuguese, to use the formerly Muslim slaves that existed in Africa as basically servants under brutality in the West as they expanded their empire after the discovery of the Americas and with Columbus. So even as Muslims, we are tied to this history. So what we have to understand is that the United States of America is a country that begins this history in a colonial paradigm. But we have to understand that also that slavery and quote-unquote anti-blackness doesn't begin in America. It starts in the Caribbean. It starts in Latin America and South America. Many people fail to understand of the supposed 10 to 15 million Africans that were transported to the Western Hemisphere during the transatlantic slave trade. Only 5% of them came to North America. The supermajority of them came to South America, Brazil, and Latin America. So what we have to understand is that this phenomenon of racism in the context is not just a context in the United States. This is the economic engine upon which Western civilization got its footing. So we have to realize that it wasn't simply about the brutality that was necessary to pick sugarcane, to pick cotton, tobacco. These items were used to generate industries. The shipping industry alone, in terms of the mercantile industry, mercantile capitalism develops as a product of the transatlantic slave trade. There's a book called Capitalism and Slavery by a man named Eric Williams. He talks about the need to use iron ore to make change, to revolutionize the economy of Great Britain. So we have to understand that development of slavery as an economic engine of capitalism is directly tied to the utility of rendering the African as subhuman. Because what we have to understand is that the beginning of the utility of using the African begins with the European priests who basically realized that at first when they tried to use Native Americans in Hispaniola after Columbus, quote unquote discovered those islands, they realized that the Native Americans could not actually weather the harsh brutality of the economic extraction of labor they were using. And a man named Las Casas, who was a priest, said, use the Africans, they are more rugged and sturdy, show mercy to the Native Americans. So it was a combination of the utility of the Catholic Church, which was part of the European Empire, and the Spanish and Portuguese throne to start importing more slaves from West Africa to fulfill this economic engine. And the reason I bring this together is that we cannot deny the importance of racism to the function of Western capitalism. And my goal here is not to convince you all to be socialists or communists or support any kind of ideology. What we have to understand is that as Muslims, first of all, on basic fundamental ideas, the current economic global paradigm we live under is haram. Number one, it's a riba-based system. It's based on interest, which makes it haram. Number two, in Islam, profit for any endeavor is relegated to only 30%. There's no limitation on profit in Western capitalism. Number three, in Islam, the Quran and the Rasul requires that we pay the laborer the fair wage for his labor. Western capitalism is based on diminution of value of labor. So in those terms, we understand that we are living in an economic paradigm that as Muslims, morally, we should fight against. So one of the things that I like to emphasize is that people love to talk about how we should fight racism until we talk about how it affects their pockets and their wallets. It's very chic. There's a reason why you will see major corporations like Netflix, Amazon Prime, or bankers like Jamie Dimon say, we must fight racism, we must fight, because it's presented in a way in which all that means is diversifying the 1% at the top without changing the quality of life at the bottom for everyone else. And you can feel good because you can say now 15% of the people that are exploring the world are black and brown. We solve racism. And that is what happens when you try to address racism without tying it to the economic system that actually requires the subjugation of black and brown people. Now, this might sound controversial. You would say, well, why is that possible? Because one of the things that capitalism requires is it has what is called, Milton Friedman, who was a known capitalist, he called it the natural unemployment index. It's known by others as being the reserve labor of army. What does that mean? That means
Brother Pascal, we lost your sound. Oh, here's what happened.
Hello? Hello?
Okay, I got you. There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Okay, I don't know what happened. I thought you heard all the presentation to this point, right?
Yes, we told you right when we couldn't hear it.
Okay. All right. So the larger point that I'm trying to say is that it's very fashionable and chic to try to challenge racism when it doesn't question the overall economic functionality of a system that requires a disproportionate number of black and brown people to be reduced to the reserve labor of army. What does that mean? That's a fancy way for saying you can't have full employment in a capitalist system. You have to have a fixed number of people who are relegated to unemployment. In a country where the supermajority of those people are white, if you let them know that they are the majority of that people, they will rebel and that society can't function. So in order to keep the society functioning, you disproportionately create the idea in their mind that only black people are poor, even though the majority of poor people are white, and it keeps capitalism functioning because you can now relegate black people conceptually in the minds of society to the reserve labor of army and relegate them to things like poverty, prison, homelessness, et cetera, et cetera. Is everyone on board and following what I'm saying?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So this connection to the utility of racism to capitalism is something that will be rarely discussed, because people are like, oh, subhanAllah, you must be a communist. Communism is haram. Meanwhile, you got a bank loan, which is loaded with riba, to buy your gas station to sell pork in a black neighborhood, and you're going to tell me because I'm talking about how capitalism is haram, I must be a communist and I'm a capitalist. Are we following where I'm going with this?
Yes. Brother Pascal, I kind of wanted to rewind a little bit, if you will. You spoke briefly about the slaves that were brought from West Africa. And I think what we miss often is who these slaves were, right? And you know, I don't necessarily like calling them slaves, but they were enslaved Africans, right? And many of them were not, I mean, these were intellects. So I don't know if you could tell us a little bit about who they were, who was brought here in the transatlantic slave trade, and the impact they had on American society. And then before I lose my train of thought, and prior to the transatlantic slave trade, the Muslim community or the Muslims had already been to America prior to Columbus even coming here. And in fact, the United States was first recognized as an independent nation by Morocco, which is a Muslim nation. And there was a pact between Morocco and the United States not to enslave the Muslims. So I'm not going to take it, like, if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Well, absolutely. Alhamdulillah. And this again goes to my larger point that you cannot divorce the origins of the transatlantic slave trade to Islam, because they're organically connected to the fall of the Islamic Empire in Spain. And many of the first slaves that were originally brought were not only Muslims, but sometimes they were Muslims who were forced to convert to Christianity. But according to research by a sister who's written a wonderful book, I don't know if any of you have read this book. I suggest you all get this book. The book is called Servants of Allah by a woman named Sylvain Diouf. Servants of Allah is about the history of the Africans in the Muslim Africans in the transatlantic slave trade. Every Muslim should read this book. It's written by a Senegalese sister who talks about, her name is Sylvain, Sylvain Diouf, D-I-O-U-F, and the whole book talks about the intimate connection between the fall of the West African Islamic civilizations and empires. We always hear people talking about the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish Empire and all these things. People fail to realize, not that we should romanticize royalty, but we had empires in Africa with Muslim scholars, like in Timbuktu, the Mali Empire, the Ghana Empire, the Empire of Futa Jalon, where we had Muslim intellectuals and scholars who had been studied in Islam, the Arabic language. They had libraries. As a matter of fact, you want to watch a phenomenal documentary on the intellectual contributions of African Muslims in West Africa. There's a YouTube you can find about the lost libraries of Timbuktu. It was done by BBC. And you can get it on YouTube, and it talks about how to this day in Timbuktu, I believe Timbuktu in Mali, in Central and West Africa, they still have thousands of libraries of books of scholarship and philosophy and tafsir, all written by these African scholars going back 500, 600, 700, 8 years. So we have to understand that these were not people who are, first of all, we should never, even if they were not Islamic scholars or Muslims, we shouldn't say, well, oh, they deserved their enslavement because they were not Muslims and they were not intellectuals. But at the same time, we should recognize that some would estimate that 30% of the Africans brought to the Western Hemisphere were likely Muslim. For example, in North America, where do you think American rice comes from? Rice is not indigenous to North America. Rice was brought along with Senegambian Muslims who came to North America because of their knowledge of how to actually crop and harvest rice, and they were brought to places like South Carolina and Louisiana to plant rice. That's a commercial product that we have to this day in this country that was particularly brought over by Senegambian Muslim Africans. So to your larger point, the utility, one of the things that we do not understand is that the European in the transatlantic slave trade understood the tribes, the religions, and the utility of the various Africans, that they were important and how they could use them to fulfill their needs in the overall process of economic exploitation through the transatlantic slave trade.
Perfect. I think you might have a little echo, but the other thing I wanted, and I think you were going to start diving into it, but when we talk about systemic racism and the foundation of this country, I mean, this topic is so massive, but if you could touch up a little bit on the like prison industrial system, the Jim Crow laws, education, and intergenerational wealth. I mean, those are just a few of the topics, but to just give people an underlying understanding of the disadvantage of Africans in this country and how systematically the African family structure has been destroyed by, you know, these various efforts that are put in place to subdue the Africans or Black Americans of African descent, or if you can go into that a bit.
Yes, this is a very good thing, because many people will say, many people who are ignorant to American history will say, well, slavery happened so many years ago, brother. My family was impressed in XYZ country. I don't understand why these people can't get over this. What is the problem with the Black Americans? I don't understand, brother. Are they lazy? They don't want to work? What is the problem? Well, what many of these brothers and sisters don't realize is that after the end of the Civil War in 1865, when African Americans were freed as slaves, there was a period called Reconstruction. Reconstruction was a political period from 1865 to 1877 in which the American government tried to do some form of economic justice to African Americans, to incorporate them into the American economic system with some measures of recompensating them for their slavery. There was a political betrayal in 1877 because of a compromise with the Northern Republicans and the Southern Democrats to renege on that Reconstruction effort, which basically abandoned the federal government's desire to recompensate and to make African Americans whole. And sadly, they began a process of discrimination. What we have to understand is that at this time, they also began the process of something called contract leasing. Contract leasing was a system in which anyone, if a Black man, often even a white man, were found to be loitering, which means just simply walking around without a purpose, they can be imprisoned and used as farm sharecropper labor. So what happens is that you see a change in the whole perception of particularly Black men. Before the Civil War is over, during slavery, when they were slaves, the perception was Black men were docile, they were weak, they were enfeebled. But all of a sudden, after the Civil War, they're considered to be dangerous, a threat. We have to lock them up in prison. The reason that was done is because it was a way to extract that free labor once again under the guise of the criminal justice system, and it started a long wave of the criminalization of Black people in America. The convict leasing system in America continued up until 1941 in this country. Okay, so we literally had a social infrastructure in this country that not only Black people, but largely Black people were relegated to be used as slave labor in prison and criminalized because of that. So you have to ask yourself, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Were these people slaves, or were they socialized into slavery because after being rendered to prison, they come out and they cannot function normally in society, and as a result, they're reduced to having no ability but anything else. Not only that, as a result of a very rigorous movement called the Colored Farmers Alliance that happened in the 1880s, in which Black sharecropping in the populist era, Black sharecroppers were trying to struggle against the exploitation of Southern agricultural industrialists and demand fair and equal pricing for their labor. They started to work with white industrialists to challenge the oppression of the segregation at that time. And what was actually done is that in 1896, because they realized that this movement was a threat to capitalism, the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling called Plessy versus Ferguson that basically reinstituted the kind of economic segregation that denied the political rights of Black people in this country and rendered them to second-class citizenship, for the particular purposes of relegating them to a semi-slave sharecropper-like status. What many of our immigrant brothers don't know, who come into, well, what happened to the African American, is up until 1965, over 60% of black labor in America were sharecroppers or domestic workers, which literally means 1965. I was born in 1968. This is 3 years before I was born. Over 60% of people, black people working in this country, were basically still working in the same type of labor that they were during slavery. And this is when many of our immigrant parents are starting to come to the United States.
Okay, so I wanted to, you reminded me of the 13th Amendment, right? And it's an interesting little twist that a lot of people, maybe now people are aware of it, but it basically states that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. I don't know. Can you touch up on the except as a punishment for crime?
Well, what that does is that opens up the ability of convict leasing to be used to basically relegate people to free labor that's not paid. The 13th Amendment, I'm not saying that convict leasing would not have happened without the 13th Amendment, because we have to remember there were whites who were convict leases as well. So they found a way around actually implementing slavery by actually creating a legal system that if you were incarcerated, and sometimes these people were incarcerated for just being around by themselves, and a massive wave of incarceration begins that renders convict leasing as to one of the major modes of production for the South to extract slave labor from poor people, particularly poor black people, up until the 1940s.
And in fact, it's still in use. I mean, slave labor or the use of prison.
But mass incarceration, remember when I was talking about the reserve labor of Army and how capitalism requires a certain fixed percentage of people basically relegated to surplus labor? What the function of prison is to be the ultimate housing location for the reserve labor of Army. And the reason why you need the majority of that population to be black is because you cannot, as capitalism is in crisis as it has been for the last 50 years, you cannot allow the majority of white people to know that, yeah, even though 48% of the prisons are black, there are 48% of you guys in here that are in here as well. So capitalism is a friend to no poor people, black, white, or otherwise, but because the system requires that it's racialized in the conception of the majority of its populace, the only people we think are in prison are black, and the only people that we think are poor are black, which is not the case at all. There are more white people on welfare in America than black people, by far. It's a fact.
Right. But when I think of, the prison system and the criminal justice system and the percentage of African Americans wrongfully convicted versus, those of European descent, it's an astronomical number. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's definitely an injustice.
Yeah, it's right. An injustice. It's an injustice. If you notice, there's a similarity in all of these things that I'm presenting to you when you're asking these questions. You notice how I'm always relegating to how these injustices serve the economic utility of the system of American society. Yeah. So racism isn't just, white people don't like me because I'm brown, they don't like my hair. So no, this is because their contempt for black skin is part of a sociological ecosystem that they're trained to believe, because the economic engine that makes this country, quote unquote, great is based on the subjugation of black and brown and dark skinned people who are considered to be relegated and outsiders. And after September 11th, unfortunately, Muslims started to get a taste of that treatment.
Okay, I have a request to allow you to complete the economy and racism information.
To complete, that's a lot.
At least wrap up your thoughts. I guess I disrupted the thought process. So if you could just wrap it up a little bit.
Well, Malcolm X said best, you cannot have capitalism without racism, period. That was a Muslim brother. He said, show me a capitalist and I'll show you a parasite. That, again, the economic engine of Western capital, and this is not to say We should have an Islamic economic system with no interest. We pay people freely, but we have a waqf that gives us a state services that provides for the poor and for the needy and those who cannot serve themselves. We shouldn't support socialism, communism, or capitalism because they're all riba interest-based systems. We should try to fight for a system that is humane, that is based on inclusion and not exploiting humanity. And in a paradigm in which humanity exploited economically, and unfortunately, because the majority of those who benefit tend to be of a certain shade, they're going to be relegating people who look like me and others in this chat to surplus labor and to be exploited. And even if we're not being exploited economically or well off, they're going to look at us and think we deserve to be.
Mashallah. Can you touch up a little bit on redlining and banking policies and the impact of that on the African American community and their ability to intergenerational wealth and all that?
Redlining and banking policy was a process after what we have to understand is that at the same time, this is the irony here, at the same time, we have African Americans from after slavery up until the 60s, literally, are still being relegated to sharecroppers and domestic workers by over 60%, right? Let's remember this, in 1959, 55% of the African American population lived below the poverty line in this country. It's only 23% line. Can you imagine being in a country where over half your population lives below the poverty line? Not only that, what do you think the poverty line was like in 1959 in America? So the irony of the injustice of people who say things like, why are you guys always asking the government? You guys are beggars. We lifted my parents came here as Italian immigrants. They worked hard and they lifted themselves up from their bootstraps. I don't know what's wrong with you people. Are you guys lazy or something? He's not going to tell you that in the early 20th century, in the 1910s and 13s, his Italian family was living in a ghetto in a bride. Half of his family were criminals selling drugs the same way they talk about black people, and it was the New Deal, which was an economic program put in when capitalism collapsed in 1929 that was created by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to make capitalism more humane, in which he started giving government services like the Federal Housing Authority, like Social Security, like the Work Products Administration, like the federal highways that lifted poor white people up into the middle class, built all the suburbs that we have all throughout America in Long Island, highways like I-95 built with federal money that destroyed black neighborhoods like Overtown in Miami on federal money. All of these poor white folk after World War II, are being lifted up into the middle class. But because the ways in which Southern senators wanted to make sure that black people were relegated to sharecropper and domestic labor, they did not get the economic benefit of that government largesse. So when you see conservatives like Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity talk about my immigrant family work hard, ask them if they got an FHA mortgage to get their house in Long Island.
Yeah, which brings us also to the next topic, which was if you could talk a little bit about Black Wall Street and the destruction of it. I am floored that it's not, something that is taught regularly, but if you can educate us a little bit about Black Wall Street and its destruction.
Well, let me tell you, the sad problem I have with talking about Black Wall Street is that we think there was only one. There were hundreds of cities in which black people, even during Jim Crow, even though the majority of them were still working as sharecroppers, by their own sweat, brow, and work, were able to make competitive businesses, were able to make shops, cities in which they were able to actually compete and sometimes be better off than large numbers of their white citizens. And oftentimes out of jealousy or out of allegations of sexual impropriety, not only were those citizens attacked in cities like Black Wall Street and Tulsa, Oklahoma, but they were burned down and destroyed because in the early 20th century in this country, in the early 1900s, it was impossible for poor whites to accept the fact there were black people who were actually doing better than them. So there were whole segments of black communities all throughout the country. There were not just one Black Wall Street, but many of them that were destroyed because, again, the threat of economic competition for black folk was too much to tolerate from reactionary forces in this country.
Yeah, I mean, Central Park in Manhattan is built on,
Used to be was a black community.
yeah, a very wealthy, prosperous black community, a successful black community, and they destroyed it. I mean, I love Central Park, but every time I go there, I think about that. It's insane.
Maha,
Yes.
this is Christopher Benjamin. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
And this part that Pascal is talking about, I mean, it should be evident to anybody who understands community building that in a segregated society, for African Americans to care for themselves and to provide for themselves, they had to create markets, they had to create banks, they had to create doctors, they had to create lawyers, they had to create systems that were parallel to the systems for which they were being excluded. And in doing that, they were able to build wealth. And as Pascal said, that wealth was oftentimes destroyed because of the jealousy that was seen by poorer whites in their own communities. This isn't this. I don't want anyone to believe that, you know, this is fake news or we're stretching the truth. It's common sense. We had to create communities parallel to the communities that were excluding us.
Absolutely, and we thank you, Brother Christopher, for joining us and congratulate you on your election.
Oh, mashallah.
Jazakallah.
For anyone who is not aware, we have Brother Christopher Benjamin, the first Muslim House Representative-elect. So many congratulations, Brother Christopher.
Alhamdulillah. One of my first jobs I had, I actually worked with Christopher in the family court. Mashallah. I've known Christopher for many years.
Yeah, we go way back.
Well, we thank you, Brother Pascal. Is there anything else that you think we should know about this particular topic, the history of racism and its institutionalization in American society, before we go open it up to question and answer? And I think Sister Patricia Salahuddin will be taking over question and answer.
I think one thing I would encourage brothers and sisters to do was actually, and I think we as Muslims should do, is to start reading aspects of African American history that's not just about celebrating Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and the Civil Rights Movement, but, you know, African American political history is very fascinating. There's a lot of interesting history here. And I think part of the tragedies we have in this country is sadly few people, even few black people, are aware of the many ways in which black people, and it was not just the Civil Rights Movement, throughout history, challenge the oppressive circumstances creatively with force in this country. And I would suggest, I mean, inshallah, maybe I could help craft together a book list, you know, if we work together. But I think that one of the things that needs to be done is that as people who are coming here as Muslims who are trying to keep up that mandate of the Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam to fight racism, is that we should become familiar with the history of the people who are oppressed in this nation. And not only African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, Latinas, the gamut.
Yeah, the natives as well, right? Genocide. This country was built on genocide and slavery, and we just have very little knowledge. It's subhanAllah. There was one person that wrote a comment, if you could discuss the school to prison pipeline.
Okay, alhamdulillah. The school to prison pipeline is basically the way in which, because one of the consequences we have to understand of all of this oppression is, particularly when you think about things like mass incarceration, deindustrialization, when African Americans after the Civil Rights Movement are moving into northern cities, and the factory jobs that help lift white poor people into the middle class are being shipped down south or being shipped to Latin America, and there's a labor shortage, the influx of drugs creates crime, family destabilization, the breakdown of family, and you have children being born in environments that are not the most healthy. So the children, unfortunately, may have behavioral difficulties, they may have problems, or they just may have unhealthy family environments. So they go to school and they act out, and what you find is disproportionately black and brown children are targeted for discipline in the public school system, and at a certain phase, these kinds of academic administrative acts relegate them to poor educational status, to special ed classes, that becomes literally a trail of tears that sends them directly into prison.
Right, and then it comes full circle. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There's ample, scholarship and, books you can read about the school to prison pipeline. It is a phenomenon. There's a different way in which teachers, unfortunately, in American schools, public or otherwise, treat particularly poor Black children. And oftentimes they're more harshly disciplined than white kids. They're more brutally disciplined than white kids. And this creates a cycle that unfortunately ends up with many of them going into incarceration.
So it's a vicious cycle, right? And then incarceration or a felony charge then strips away your right to vote, and on and on
It
and on.
also strips your ability to get a decent job, strips your ability to create wealth, strips your ability to become a functional member of society.
Absolutely. Okay, they're asking for your brilliant book list. I don't know if you could share that with us.
I got a whole list. I mean, it's going to take a while. It's not a piece it will take a long time for me to put that together.
Okay, so I don't know, is Sister Patricia still on? Do you want to take over the questions? I'm seeing them come in.
All righty.
All right.
Okay. Well, speaking of the book, first of all, assalamu alaikum, everyone. The book list, Brother Pascal, what we could do is you send us the list. We give you time to put it together, and you send it to us, and we send it out to the people who are on now and to our other guests that we have in the upcoming series and the past series. So if you're willing to do that, we're willing to help get it out.
Inshallah, that's a project that we could definitely work on. I'll keep in contact with the sisters who requested my presence, and I'll, inshallah, try to do that.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. Okay, so before I begin the act of questions, I have a question for the audience, for the participants here. The purpose of this series, well, first let me show my face here, sorry about that. The purpose of the series, of these presentations that we're doing, is education. And education is to get information. Education brings out of you what's already in you. And that information, this information that you're receiving, is going to bring something out of you. So my question to you is, what do you plan to do with that? So I want you to think about that as we are going through your questions and getting more information from Brother Pascal. I want you to think about, what do you plan to do with this information that you've heard today? I think he's given us a hint on some things that we can do, but let's think about that. What can we do with this information that we've received today? Because receiving information and not doing anything with it is not beneficial. It doesn't benefit you, and it doesn't benefit the community. So let's think about that while we're continuing our conversation with Brother Pascal. Okay, so
Sister Patricia, I will ask you, as the elder on this chat that I can see, and as a woman who's lived most of the history, I will defer to you. I'll ask you if you feel that my presentation of that history was adequate and to your liking, because you probably lived more of it than anyone else here on this chat.
How did you know how old I was? I think your presentation was right on point. It's just, that history is definitely something that I have lived through and still going through. The sharecropping part, my stepfather was not a sharecropper, but I do know, I'm gonna try to use elevated language here. I do know the trouble that he went through. That's as high as I can get. That he went through trying to farm on his own. I grew up on a farm. I raised on a farm. He had a farm. He had dairy farm. He had soybean crop, corn crop, cotton crop. I picked cotton. He had all of these things that he was trying to do. And he wasn't a sharecropper. He owned it. He owned the land. He owned the tractors and the trucks and the horses. But it was a hard road to hoe, because if you showed that you had any wealth, and because we get away with it because we are in the country and nobody sees you, You know, you're out in the woods somewhere, no one sees what's going on in your life. But if you would purchase a car that was brand new, you would be targeted. And so my stepfather never purchased a brand new car. In fact, his truck was so old and dilapidated that the kids in the neighborhood just laughed, you know, at how horrible it was to drive his vehicle. So yes, I've lived this, what you're talking about, I've lived it. Yes, I have. And that's why I'm so passionate about it, about today, about the possibilities of today, about what we can do in terms of our children, about what we can do in terms of our own lives. What can we do? The time is right. You know, it's time now to do something. And that's why I want you to ask that question. I want you to ponder on that question. Okay, how can we help to prevent voter suppression is one question for you, Brother Pascal.
Well, that's something that unfortunately we have to fight at the federal level. We have to fight. That's unfortunately a policy agenda on the current administration that actually started even before the current administration. And I think that I'm one of those. I know this for some Muslims this is a controversial subject. Unfortunately, brother, I do not want to vote in the capitalist system while I take out a mortgage to pay my house and have my store selling the pork products. No, I can't. You will participate in an economy that is exploiting people left and right, but you don't want to, participate by voting in the system because you feel, oh, voting is haram. I mean, if voting is haram, why do you really immigrate to a system that's based on so much oppression? Is my question. I asked to these brothers and sisters who make these arguments about voting being haram, so on and so forth. I think the larger obligation is to challenge the attempts by particularly the current administration and all administrations, generally it's the Republicans, to suppress the vote by demanding our legislatures, whether they be Democrat or Republican, to actually protect and fight against voter suppression, primarily by reinstating the Voting Rights Act and giving force to the Voting Rights Act that Black people fought for to be able to give them the right to participate to vote. And second of all, also demanding, and I think, we have to ask, why isn't there an agenda in the Democratic Party to make voting rights protection a constitutional amendment? I think that we should demand a constitutional amendment to vote and update and protect voter security in this country. I think there should be a political movement that should be started to demand a constitutional amendment to the United States Constitution to basically protect the integrity of voting for American citizens. And I think that someone should actually work on making that a part of an agenda.
Okay, thank you. There's a statement, if anyone wants to be a poll worker or wants to work to protect poll, especially attorneys, please contact me. Sister Afifa has put her name and telephone number in the chat box. There's some people responding to the question that I asked. Sister Samara said that, Samara Ali said that he would, he feel he should start, I love learning from you. Okay, I feel it should start with me. If I don't begin applying this education to myself right away, correcting my implicit internal biases, then moving outward in the areas of my, moving outward in the areas of my influence. That's a very, starting with self. And I guess starting with that list that Brother Pascal is going to put together for us, that would be a wonderful start. Also sharing with my colleagues, Zaha Hop said that sharing this information with my colleagues, friends, and family. As you said, information is only that until it's shared and collectively added upon to better one's community. Okay, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Okay, the question from El Marie, my friend from Mississippi. What can we as individuals do to eradicate the systemic racism in our communities? Brother Pascal, question for you.
Well, I'm a firm believer is that you have to address how the racism manifests. In other words, is the racism simply about how people are being treated, or are you talking about racism in the form of housing, academic, educational? There's all types of racism. There's environmental racism. And what I think that we should do in your community is actually engage in something that was very common in the civil rights movement called political education. You should rent out the public school gymnasium in your neighborhood, get people who understand the dynamics of how racism is affecting the area, and talk to the community about how this needs to be fought. These are not things that are expensive. You can start doing political education and talking to the neighborhood about how these things affect people and how they should translate that into political power and political demands.
Very good point. I think one of the things that we have to realize that our children are not taught history correctly, whether it's general history or African American history, is not being taught. And personally, I think we should figure out a way to teach our children. And then now there's a question about how, I wonder how it has impacted Black students not being in schools that have a prison to school pipeline during the transition to remote learning. So I can't answer that question, but that's a good question.
That's a big question. It's a huge question. I'm not qualified. I'm not an education specialist, so I'm not qualified to even venture into that area.
Yeah, but that's a thought. That's something to think about. Okay, so then the next question is, how can we locally become more involved personally? That's a question from
I think what you have to do is you have to actually be a good civic citizen. Find out what local organizations you're interested in. Go on Google and type certain, for example, if you're interested in, say, in housing discrimination, type housing discrimination agencies, Miami, housing discrimination organizations, Miami, and Google it. And look if there are any anti-housing discrimination organizations in your community. And if housing discrimination is something you want to fight, and you feel that the organization is full of competent people, join the organization. Become a good civic member of society and engage and indulge and participate in organizations. And this is something that Muslims in America, quite frankly, really should be doing more. And I would like to say, frankly, that one of the sad things, I've been a Muslim since 1998, over 30 years, alhamdulillah, is that over 20 some odd years, not 30 quite years, is that the intellectual resources of the African American Muslim community in terms of Black men and women who came out of the movement era, SNCC, the Black Panther Party, the Republic of New Africa, all of these movements, there are many Muslims we have in the Ummah who came out of these movements, who are Muslims who came to Islam. Why is it that the immigrant community doesn't tap into the knowledge base of these brothers and sisters on how to work in community organizing and organizing political movements to get action to fight the oppression of not only African Americans, but all people?
Okay. Before the question gets out of my, not a question, but before the comment gets out of my sight, one of my fellow teacher friends, Amina, wrote that we should have some books for middle and high school students to use along with their regular texts on American history. That's a very good point. It's something the community needs to think about. What can we do to educate our children, because they are not being educated educate them in history, because they are not getting the education that they need. If they're attending, whether they're attending a private school or whether they're attending a public school, it's not happening. Sister Maha mentions that part of the purpose of this series is to expose some of the discriminatory practices in our community and how it has impacted our African American Muslims. have you had any personal experiences of racism in our Muslim community? And this is for the broader audience, I'm assuming, Maha, right? For everybody to answer that question. If anyone wanted to chime in on with that question.
I could write a book. I could write a book. I could write a book on that subject alone.
Maybe you should. Maybe you should.
Well, you know, let me see. I want you to just realize this. I know we have many brothers and sisters who come up and making background. Can you imagine how offensive? And by the way, I will disclose something. I am black and I'm American, but my parents are from Haiti. My parents were Caribbean immigrants, okay? So there are brothers and sisters like Sister Patricia who have a more organic connection to this history even than I do. But can you imagine being a black person who comes from generations of suffering this, try to become a Muslim in this country, and someone comes off a plane from a foreign country and tries to treat you as a Muslim, as a second-class citizen in your own country that fought white people treating you that same way in the Ummah? How do you think that treatment affects the psychology of an African American Muslim? That he's literally being treated like a second-class citizen in the masjid when his ancestors fought to not be treated like a second-class citizen in his own country by someone who literally hasn't been in the country 50 years.
Something to think about, and yeah, something to think about, and we have, and I know people who have had that experience when they're treated as second-class citizen in the masjid. And to be honest with you, a lot of us saw Islam as the religion that this is a space where we can be equal, and this is a space where we can be brothers and sisters to our brothers and sisters.
Well, alhamdulillah, I would like to respond. I'm going to respond to that in very quick. Islam is perfect. Muslims are problems.
I agree. And I definitely wasn't going that right, that it is Islam that was the problem. It was the people. Of course, it's the people that's the problem. And I think I think that's important to I figured it out. And anytime I hear people talk about it, I remind them that it's Islam that's not the problem. It's the people that's the problem. And at the same time, you do have people who experience this. And I was just explaining to you, to our participants, that is a lot of the reason people, they felt when they came to Islam that this is what we would get. And I think it's just a test, actually, when you don't get it. Are you going to turn around and go back? Or are you going to study more and know what the real situation is? So that was my point for making that statement. Okay, are there any other questions? Any other comments? Any other comments on what you plan to do? That we've heard even more information. What do you plan to do with this information that you heard? And some suggestions from other people, what they're planning to do. What do you plan to do with the information that you've heard today? Okay, can you speak a bit on Imam Jamil Amin and our lack of advocacy for his freedom?
Alhamdulillah, Rabbi Alameen. Imam Jamil Amin is a brother, mashallah, or former imam from Atlanta, Georgia, who has dedicated his life to fighting for justice for black people. He was a former Minister of Information of the Black Panther Party under the name of H. Rap Brown. He was a very radical, very revolutionary brother who converted to Islam and became an even more transformative Muslim leader in Atlanta. And alhamdulillah, according to what many brothers believe, and alhamdulillah, I believe, he was unjustly incarcerated, I believe, either for an assault or accusation of shooting a police officer, and was given life in prison. This is a man who was a political prisoner. And contrary to what many of you believe, there are many political prisoners in this country, particularly black ones. Many of them were members of the Black Panther Party. Many of them were involved in the radical movement era that existed in the late 60s and early 70s of this country. And it has been a prerogative of the U.S. government for years to hunt down and persecute these people. And I think it is a travesty that Imam Jamil Al-Amin is getting more support from African-American non-Muslims in this fight to be freed as a political prisoner than he's getting from many in the Muslim Ummah. His history is something that should be learned. He wrote a book, Islam Revolution. Revolution by the Book by Imam Jamil Al-Amin. He is someone he is the kind of man that if he was out of prison, Muslims should be listening to about how to address injustice in this country, because he dedicated his life at the cost of being an enemy of the state to do so.
Thank you. We had a presentation, Sister Maha, through our outreach program, did a presentation with Imam Jamil's son about 3 weeks ago. Was it Maha, or 2 weeks ago? And anyway, it was a while back. It was a time ago. Not a time. It was just two weeks ago. But anyway, the information is still up. Sister Maha has put in the chat box looks like is that Twitter or is that Instagram, Maha? Anyway.
That's Instagram, and those are the handles, I think, also on Twitter and on Facebook.
So we can still spread the word and still support this movement to free Imam Jamil. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, it's 4:13. We said we were going to finish at 4:15. We have 2 minutes left. If there aren't any other questions, we'll turn it back over to Maha.
Am I closing out? I wasn't sure. Okay, all right. Is Brother Samir still on?
Yes.
Okay. Is he there?
No, he's not.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. All right. First of all, Brother Pascal, you are a little known gem in our community. I am not sure why that is. As a board member, and Sister Patricia is also a board member of the South Florida Muslim Federation, we would absolutely love for you to engage our community further. I mean, this is a small little group, but your message is profound. Your knowledge is, it goes very deep, and you're very passionate about this topic that is absolutely critical at this point. I know that the community outreach program we have on the to-do list to do a program for Black History Month, but just we need ongoing education, and we need your knowledge, and we need more sessions like this to a broader audience. So I thank you. I thank you for joining us, for your commitment to deal with some of the technological issues.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that, but I'll just ask the audience, inshallah, I hope that we all benefited from my presentation, and I will request you, was everyone satisfied with the information? If there were any errors, may Allah forgive me, and may Allah, inshallah, increase me in the ability to correct them. If you have any suggestions you would make for my presentation, things or improvements, or if you were satisfied, I would love feedback, inshallah.
No, we really enjoyed your presentation, and I know there's so much knowledge in there, and we're cramming it into a short time. So we appreciate you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are working on part 3 of this series, and it is my fault that we cannot announce that because I am multitasking and I haven't confirmed our next speaker yet. I'm sorry, Sister Patricia. But we will get that out to you as soon as possible, and we would love for all of you to join us for the next part in this series. And Brother Pascal, if you can join us, that would be fantastic as well.
Sister Maha, as a matter of fact, why don't you email me so we can connect? So I mean, I didn't even know this of this organization. And the brother who invited me to speak at Barry, he suggested me to you, and he was like, brother, you have to do this. So alhamdulillah, please email me after this is over. We'll connect and we'll talk in terms of how, inshallah, I should try to get more involved, inshallah.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe that wonderful brother was Dr. Mersad. Is that right?
Yeah, Dr. Mersad, mashallah, yes, that's a good brother. He's always pushing me. And so I'm very skeptical, because he's like, no, brother, you need to come out and talk more. No, I'm like, nah, He's always kind of trying to push me to.
You should. We need your knowledge. We need your knowledge. So On that note, if anybody else wants to know a little bit more about the South Florida Muslim Federation, you can go to the website at www.soflomuslims.com. You all an email from me if you would like to support our efforts. That would be greatly appreciated. Hit that donate button and help us continue with programs like this. Otherwise, I think we're closing out. If Brother Samir is not there, I shall do it. He's not there. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات تواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صدق الله العظيم. جزاك الله خير. We'll see you all soon. Please stay safe, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.